Good evening. Thank you for joining us here tonight, and thank you to those of you joining us via the internet. My name is Mike Shablaski. I'm the Executive Director of Transform Rockford. Welcome to the Rockford Public Library's Nordlof Center for a chance to learn about and discuss alignment and regionalism. This is one of a series of community conversations where we're going to delve into best practices, lessons learned from others for our consideration and development of strategy and planning to make this a top 25 community in the Rockford region. Transform Rockford and our presenting partner, the Rockford Area Economic Development Council, care deeply about these subjects. It is only through alignment and regionalism that we will realize our potential by fully leveraging our regional strengths. Our region's greatest assets are neither the property nor the responsibility of just one party. Think of our workforce, our parks and forest preserves, our airport. Many parties are directly affected by these assets, and many need to be at the table when opportunities present themselves to leverage these assets. At Transform Rockford, we think of alignment in multiple ways. We think of stakeholders. This is why we use what many of you have seen as a network map, that we are purposeful about thinking about how we engage the entire community and those that are affected by the decisions made. We think of issues. This is the skeleton of a transformation map. We recognize that issues are interconnected and need to be considered as to how they will affect one another. Most importantly, we think of vision and values, shared vision, shared values. We think about the direction and trajectory of our efforts and how we will work with and treat one another. We must be oriented toward what it is that we share, our common goals and objectives. Whether we call it alignment, collective impact, or partnerships, we're all talking about the same thing. Think of the shared value of unity. Let me read that to you briefly here, and I hope this resonates with you. Place the greater good of all parts of our region and its transformation ahead of self or organizational interests. I want to thank the volunteers and the staffs of both the Rockford Area Economic Development Council and Transform Rockford who made this evening possible. As I mentioned, shared values is a big part of what it is that we think about, how it is that we go about things, how it is that we treat one another, and what is always in front of mind. And so, as is customary with Transform Rockford meetings, we want to start off with a conversation a little bit about shared values. And to help us with that, I want to welcome Katie Kelly and Brooke Hansel to the podium to share some thoughts. They're members of the Transform Rockford Shared Values team.
Good evening. I am Katie Kelly, and I work with Midway Village Museum, and I am also a volunteer for Transform Rockford on the Shared Values team. And they asked me here tonight to speak about how I use the shared values in my own work and in my own life. And I have chosen to speak about inclusion tonight. I am working with Midway Village. I am their educator, and I do tours there. And one of the newest tours we have created is for our exhibit, Many Faces, One Community, which looks at our immigration to Rockford. And with that, I have created a new school tour specifically for K through 12 students in the area, talking about inclusion and how we can, as individuals, make a big difference in our community. So this tour, we look at specific ways that we as an individual can impact our fellow students and our fellow community members. So when we go through the tour, it's a very interactive experience. The students look at how they are physically interacting with the students on their tour. So they realize by the end of the tour how they are actually including others in conversation as they talk about those hard questions of diversity and tolerance. And they're also looking at how their body language includes or doesn't include others. And they look at how their words include or don't include. So for us, when we leave the classroom, when we leave the museum, the students really understand that they are really a part of the community and they are part of that change for inclusion. So that's something that I do. Brooke?
I'm Brooke Hansel. I'm a student at Rockford Lutheran High School over on North Alpine, and I'd like to talk a little bit about responsibility. In my opinion, responsibility is the root of all the shared values on this board over here. When someone accepts responsibility in their community, they also respect or accept the responsibility to be interconnected with their peers and community members. They accept the responsibility to be inclusive and respectful of all others. And I may not be as experienced or wise as everyone else in this room, as I'm only a high schooler. I'm going to be a senior in the fall, but I would personally like to accept responsibility to spread these shared values in my life and in my community, and I hope you will all do the same.
Thanks, Katie and Brooke. Good evening. I am Mike Nicholas, President of the Rockford Area Economic Development Council. I want to tell you a little bit about our organization and what we do and why this community conversation is important to our region's future. Simply put, the work of the Rockford Area EDC is about jobs, keeping the ones that we already have here and creating new jobs in our region. We work with diverse groups, people in business, government, education, nonprofits, and other organizations. And what we do is diverse as well. Attracting companies to the Rockford region is very different from helping businesses expand. But they both lead to jobs, which increases our buying power, which leads to more stores and restaurants that we want. The ripple effects go on and on. In January of 2010, the unemployment rate in the Rockford area was 20%. As of last month, the unemployment rate in Rockford was 5.8%. It dipped below 6% or 8%, 6% for the first time in 8 years. Our unemployment rate is actually lower than that in the city of Chicago right now. It's only a tenth of a point, but it's still lower, and we're fairly close to the state average unemployment rate, whereas historically we track 1 or more points above the state unemployment rate. In total, it all adds up to a community and a quality of life we desire and that we can be proud of. It is my pleasure tonight to introduce Tom Clark, the CEO of Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation and the Executive Vice President of the Denver Metro Chamber of Commerce. Tom has more than 30 years of economic development experience at the state, regional, county, and city levels, much of it in Chicago. He also has a number of important Illinois connections. He once worked at the Illinois Department of Commerce and Community Affairs. And take note, U of I graduates, he earned his master's in public administration from the University of Illinois. The reason we invited Tom here today is his nationally recognized efforts in collaborative regional economic development. Metro Denver is the nation's first regional economic development entity, bringing together over 70 cities, counties, and economic development agencies in the 9-county Metro Denver and northern Colorado area. What does it look like in Denver? They have the new headquarters for at least 3 major companies, including Lockheed Martin, Space Systems, Commercial Space, a major energy expo that recently attracted 3,000 people to showcase the state's position at the forefront of responsible solar, wind, oil, coal, and natural gas development, a code of ethics in which members agree to promote the well-being of the region ahead of the individual gains. Tom's firsthand experience, based on Tom's firsthand experience, our region has an opportunity to learn what creating a culture of cooperation can and must look like. We need to grow and strengthen infrastructure, become an innovative hub, and attract the workforce truly needed to change a region. Please welcome Tom Clark.
Thanks, Tom. Hi, everybody. It's great to be back. I remember the day Lee Iacocca walked into our office and said to my boss, he said, Mr. Castle, I have 3,500 people in Belvedere building Omnis and Horizons. And if you give me 10 million bucks, you can keep those jobs. My boss, I worked for Jim Thompson, but my boss was a guy by the name of John Castle, looked at me and said, you know, Mr. Iacocca, we're kind of like Republicans here, and we're kind of like free market people. We believe in competition. And Iacocca looked at me and said, one more thing, I'll pay you back at 12% interest. He paid us back 18 months later with 12% interest. And the reason that he got the money was because my boss trusted him. So what I'm going to talk a little bit about tonight is trust and how the world took a really in-the-dump town and moved it to a different place. We're a 9-county economic development organization. We act as a servant leader. We do things for our partners they cannot do. We can do national marketing. We can do huge websites. All of this we do for our partners for free because it makes us all better. We work with the State Office of Economic Development. We provide the first money in whenever there's a really big infrastructure opportunity. And we're also the folks who fight back the forces of darkness. In Colorado, you can put anything on the ballot. It's like a mini California. And so you need somebody floating around who can put up the money and move very quickly to defeat stuff that is really nuts. I'm not kidding you. We had a thing on the ballot 4 years ago that said you could sue your boss for the fact that you were not happy. Okay? We have about a $4 million a year budget. So this is how our partners work. These are just the major partners. We send them all kinds of information every day to make them competitive. And what they do in return is they interact with one another in a very, very unique way that when this idea first surfaced in 1986, everybody thought we were the craziest people ever. There were 7 of us originally when we put this together. And of course, the egos of economic development people, we named ourselves appropriately the Magnificent Seven. When we added the 8th guy, the name stuck, the Crazy 8. People thought we were nuts that you could actually think together, hold a set of common values, and move a region forward. So this is how bad we sucked, okay? 1974, we had 153 days of kill you air. I'm not talking about bad air. I'm talking about kill you air, okay? It's pretty difficult when the #1 most polluted city in the country is Los Angeles to fly to Los Angeles and say, you should move your company from the #1 most polluted city in the country to the #2 most polluted city in the country. So what was an environmental problem became an economic problem. And it was the first thing we tackled. 31% office vacancy rate in downtown. 40-somethings leave. This is the leadership group in your town, for the way, if you don't know that. By the time people get into their 40s, they start thinking about giving back to their community. They build a career and what have you. And this is when they emerge as leaders. When they're leaving town, it's a horrible thing. The cities were creating more and more economic development organizations. They were proliferating like rabbits, and nothing was coming of it. The city was an inwardly looking city. The Chamber of Commerce, when I walked in 1985, had 35 people on it. 33 white guys, all over the age of 50, all Republicans, 1 token black and 1 token woman. They thought they were running the town. What they didn't know is the town was running away from them. The downtown was so dead was that you could shoot a cannonball down at 5 o'clock on a Friday afternoon down the 16th Street Mall, and you couldn't even hit a beggar, okay? And you can see where we were in terms of, there's a survey of CEOs done in 1987. So here's where we were in 1995. This was after about 8 or 9 years. You can see on R&D facilities, we'd moved from 32nd to 10th, from headquarters 48 to 32nd. Today, we are one of the major attractors of corporate headquarters in the United States. We do 6 to 9 major corporate headquarters relocations every year. Manufacturing up to 5th, distribution from 42nd to 6th, district office, which is what we were as a district town. But the challenge you have is that you just don't live in the metropolitan Rockford, Belvedere area. You live in a state. And your state is not exactly the most competitive state in the country. And it makes it difficult for you to do business here. And I've always said it takes the states to make Congress understand how to behave, and it takes local governments to make the state understand how to behave. But you can see there's a huge number of issues there that are not necessarily helpful for your economic development team to go forward, except for the fact you've got the second cheapest residential property taxes in the country, and we have the third. But it gives you an idea that there's work to be done at the state also. Here's some of the things when you just prowl through the web. Second on the list, the largest city with the highest real estate taxes as a percentage in 2005. Number 5, largest percentage of people in hospitals or wards for drug and alcohol abuse. 21st in the top list of 101 cities with the highest unemployment rate between 2000 and 2009. We were the poster children for the dot bomb. 2000, 2001, 2003, 2004, I felt your pain. On the other side, largest percentage of females working in industry, primarily in machinery, which means that you have a diverse labor force and you have a significant participation by females. College grads are a little bit low. But the one I love is 16th in concentration of people with Swedish ancestry. You've never seen so many Carlsons and all that stuff, right? I was raised in Minnesota. I was around with a bunch of Norwegians. So how it began, in the 1980s, we had a major oil bust in Colorado. The Saudis got troubled that we were going to make too much money, and they just dropped the price of oil to $7 a barrel. And we had every major oil company living in downtown Denver. And within the course of 6 months, they'd all moved back to Houston. We went to that 31% vacancy in downtown, and the first thing that happens is that what we call the finger-pointing time, and that's it's their fault, it's their fault. It's the mayor's fault, it's the governor's fault, it's the legislature's fault, it's the business community's fault. These are the people who should be taken out into the streets and executed. You can spend your whole life trying to find who's at fault. The point is that it didn't make any difference. The business community solution was incredibly stupid. They were going to hire an economic development gunslinger to come in and tell all the local governments to behave. We all knew that wasn't going to work. Believe it or not, cities actually have sovereignty. So the crazy 8 finally started out and asked themselves a simple question. Can we present our region in a way our prospective companies see us as a place, not a group of individual counties and cities? And in my business, it's not uncommon for a company to get to a building that they like and say, boy, this is the building we want, let's buy it. Where are we? Because as you know, boundaries overlap. Nobody really knows exactly where they are at any given time. And the question we asked ourselves at that time, what keeps us from working collaboratively? And the biggest thing was suspicion. I suspected that the guy next to me was going to do me wrong. And he was expecting the same, and she down the street thought we were both trying to kill off her. And the reason that was because we couldn't communicate effectively with people. This was before Outlook had been created. And the ability for someone to notify folks by phone on a rush project where a company was looking was very difficult. And if a company located in another city, the folks who weren't in the office on Friday to get the phone call turned to their boss and said, well, we know those guys in Denver have been screwing us for years. And it just played to the same stuff. These are what we think are the key elements of regional success. Number one, you have to have a crisis. People won't change until it's impossible not to change. Secondly, somebody's got to go out and raise a lot of money. You need money to make things move. I'm sorry about it, but it's the painful reality. The other great lesson we learned was you have to have a big tent. And I mean not a tent like this. I mean tent like this. Because good ideas come from anywhere. They don't come from the elites. They don't come from a select group of people. They don't come from the community elders. They come from anywhere. And you have to have a mechanism to be able to take those ideas in, vet them, decide if they have value, and then turn them back to the community to execute. Obviously, you need to see yourself as your customers do. And for us, everybody knew Denver. Didn't have any real cooties on it as a brand. We always thought it was going to be a cow town. People say, oh, it's going to be Denver, that's a cow town. Still got a hitching post down there downtown. The only people who ever said that were people who lived in Denver. The people outside said, we think it's kind of a cool place. It's at the foot of the mountains, da-da-da-da-da. I always tell people, I live in Westminster, Colorado. And whenever I tell people, where do you live? I live in Westminster. And they go, it's funny, you've already gotten rid of that accent, huh? Because people really don't know Westminster at all except the one in the UK. You have to have a code of conduct that's enforceable, that can literally deliver sanctions for people who break the code of conduct and be able to hold one another accountable. What we decided to do was build infrastructure during downturns because it's almost like a mini recovery. You have a deep drop. You hire a bunch of construction people to come in and build something that will help your economy, like roads or transit or public buildings or stuff like that. And those people recycle that money, usually from Friday at 5 o'clock till Monday morning. Heavy industrial work, construction people spend money really fast. So you get this little lift, and when it's over, the world changes for you because companies don't look at where you are, they look at where you're going. You can have a really crappy place like being the second most polluted city, but if you're doing something about it, which we did, people said, now there's a place where people are thinking. One of the hardest ones for us is to get people to understand that you have to have about a 30 to 40 year leadership plan. How do you continue to funnel new leaders into the community when those 20-somethings become 40-somethings? And that they're totally prepared, they have knowledge, they understand how your region works, their role in it, things you can do to make it work more efficiently. We have that through our foundation at the Chamber, the Denver Chamber Leadership Foundation. The private sector is oftentimes the big ribbon that handles longevity in our community. When you're going to build an airport, the first idea of Denver International Airport started in 1972, and the airport was done in 1995. There was 20-some years, that was 4 governors, 3 mayors of the city of Denver alone. But there was one single person in the private sector who sat on the airport committee from 1972 to 1995. Second to last, you need a servant leader, someone who is not interested in getting their name in the paper. These are people who are very much focused on serving the people who actually implement it. Our job at the EDC is to serve our partners and to make sure they get the information they need. And when we hire people, we say, if you think that you're going to sit on the dais when the big deal gets done, don't come to work for us. You should be sitting in the audience. Maybe you did all the work, but you have to have the humility to realize it's your partner's turn, not yours. And last of all, which was the one that when the big breakthrough occurred, was a commit to a vibrant urban center. The suburbs, believe it or not, during this period of time, finally realized that a vibrant urban center was like the retail window on the success of downtown. And that allowed us to build a baseball stadium in downtown, rebuild a football stadium, build a convention center, and build an arena for professional basketball and for hockey, which one of these days we hope will actually be professional hockey. The other thing is building your brand and continuing to run it out. This is just basic marketing word. We did a lot of surveys, did a lot of focus groups. We created a killer website for our neighbors with like the praying mantis. You know, once you're in, you never get out, or Hotel California. And it's really expensive. It cost us to build it about $187,000. It costs us about $160,000 a year to run it. But it is truly the way in which marketing is done today. We do all the other vehicles. We Facebook, we tweet, Twitter. We have a whole group of people who are what we call the E-Force, and we send them Twitter feeds every day, and they send them out to very large networks. Our name shows up everywhere, every day. But this was the infrastructure strategy. After we got air quality fixed, we said what we really need is that we have very little public debt, and we have a whole bunch of stuff we need to build. So we started off by taking a very small old convention center and making it 1 million square feet, and then we expanded it twice after that in the last 30 years. The Denver Center for the Performing Arts, during that old oil bust period, they stopped construction on it. Today it's the second largest single theater complex in the United States behind the Lincoln Center. Denver International Airport, just a small little strip on the northeast side of town. Anybody here remember what it was like to land at Stapleton in the summer? I'm sorry, we're going to have to be diverted for about 7 hours while we fly around waiting for this thunderstorm to pass. Then came Coors Field, the Pepsi Center, Sports Authority Field, where the Broncos play. The T-Rex project was a combination of a highway and rail project down the southeast side of town. The Anschutz campus at Fitzsimmons, which is a major life sciences center, which is a square mile of Children's Hospital, University Hospital, cancer centers, da-da-da-da-da. Dick's Sporting Goods Stadium, 2007, and Fast Tracks, which is a 119-mile transit system, which was passed in 2004. Most of it will be completed by the end of 2016. There's the Blue Bear in 1985, 2016. That's kind of the beginning and the ending of the infrastructure strategy. Up in the left is the Anschutz campus, DIA, Coors Field, Pepsi Center, and Mile High Stadium. All those done in a very short period of time. And this is the transit system. For those of you who are going to Denver in the fourth quarter of 2016, you'll be able to start here and go out to DIA, or if you land, you can take a train right into downtown to Union Station. These were the regional entities. In Illinois, you have special districts. In Colorado, we have millions of special districts because everything is, we're so afraid of concentrated political power, we do single-purpose facility, single-purpose districts. Scientific Cultural Facilities District, region-wide tax that guarantees every citizen in the 7 of the 9 counties that they will get access to arts and cultural facilities, touring musicians, reduced fares to the Denver Museum and the Denver Children's Museum, the RTD stadium districts, which build the 2 stadiums, the Metro Mayor's Caucus, which was copied by Mayor Richie Daley in Chicago, that brought all the mayors together. It was the first one in the country was created there in Metro Denver. 34 mayors. Largest mayor city of Denver, 683,000 person. The smallest city, Foxfield, 283 people. They both get 1 vote. And they have to have unanimity. They were the keys to get the fast tracks passed. Everybody was trying to peel them off, and they all hung together. Some of them didn't really want to build the transit system all at once, but because of the unity of purpose that we did need a transit system over time, they said, I will step back and keep my mouth shut. I wish we would only build 1 lane at a time instead of building it all, but because this was a regional build, all of it got built at the same time. The Urban Drainage District and what's now called the Metro Denver EDC, all those occurred in about a 6-year period. Now you can see the major amenities. This is the convention center. This is Coors Field. This is the Pepsi Center where the Avs and the Nuggets play. And this is Sports Authority Field. And the idea was to create this walkable neighborhood, but it also has a free transit bus, which now goes out to Union Station. Sometimes people don't really want to play that nice. What do you do with those guys? I always say, what do we do with these guys? We had somebody come from out of town who came to our community that wanted to build a hotel. And they played by the rules. Our rules are simple. You can come in and you can compete. And the cities get to compete for the deal. And when the cities get knocked off of the list, they have to get off of the list. This happened to be a major hotel developer. Three metropolitan areas were in the finals. As the process went through, the other 2 fell off, and 1 was left, the city of Aurora, Colorado. The local downtown hoteliers saw this as competition. So they decided they were going to try to kill off the proposal that the city of Aurora had prepared for this company, which was all done in exactly the way in which we tell each other to behave. So when that happens, somebody has to write a really crappy editorial chastising their own business community for behaving like children and not following the rules. It's not fun, but somebody has to be the guardian at the gate for regionalism. You got to be tough enough, and you have to have enough people behind you and enough money to be able to be kind of a hard player. This is a very polite headline, but if you ever read it, it's not very polite because people are not following the rules. When it came to a strategy for how do we drive the economy forward, not just for a couple of years, but forever, we went to Harvard. And a guy by the name of Michael Porter, who did a seminal work in 1988 and again in 1995 called Clusters. And Porter didn't really understand it when he first wrote about it, but it seemed like companies that kind of did the same thing ended up in the same place. And he wrote about that, and everybody went, boy, I never thought of that. By 1995, he had figured out the reason they ended up in the same place is that they could do business with each other, they could benefit from concentrating labor, and ultimately, they were all there to exploit a resource. So if you think of Rockford, Rockford got in the machine tools business and the extrusion business for lots of reasons. The extrusion business because you had the canyon down to the Rock River, and extrusion requires that product be dropped over the side of a cliff as part of the manufacturing process. Machine tools mattered, and once those companies grew, they tend to draw other companies in. For us to decide what a cluster is for us, we look at the top 30 metros and say, what do they have in a concentration of a whole bunch of different industries, and are we in the top 30? If we get in the top 30, then we know we have a cluster. The Anschutz campus, which I talked about very briefly, was the part of our decision to become a biostate. We had a tiny little pharmaceutical, a tiny little medical products, medical device company in Colorado, in Metro Denver. So we went to Battelle and said, what does it take to be a biostate? They said, well, you got to have a locus of economic activity. In other words, we had to build the Anschutz campus, which we did. Second thing is you have to have a superstar. We happen to have a Nobel laureate by the name of Tom Cech, who had done world-renowned studies in RNA. Unfortunately, he didn't live in Colorado anymore. He lived in Washington, D.C., was running the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and giving away $8 million a day. Can you imagine that for a fun job? The third thing you need is that the venture capital folks are not funding that what's called the valley of death. Your first money, if you're an entrepreneur, is from 3 F's: friends, fools, and family. Okay? And after you design this little product or this little drug, then you have to prove that you can make it in a big vat. That's called proof of concept. It costs between $35,000 to $250,000 to do it, and there was no money. The venture capitalists had walked away from all those things. So we created a fund that would be peer-reviewed, and the state would give them money, and we did that in the first year. We spent $1 million. We got 11 companies and 110 employees. Utah thought it was so wonderful. They put $4 million in the next year, and they got 40 companies and 500 new jobs. It's kind of a one-to-one relationship. But we did those 3 things. We went to Tom Cech and said, Tom, aren't you tired of hanging out with prime ministers and kings and queens? Why don't you come back to Colorado? You never sold your house. We know you like to teach freshman chemistry. We'll let you do both. And we'll give you $250 to build a building. So we had an infrastructure project, and we built one of Tom Cech's buildings, and he raised the money and built the other one. Guess what? A year later, Battelle comes up at the International Bio Convention and said, we now have a new biostate. It's Colorado. We did the same with wind industry. In 2000, we had not one single kilowatt being created by wind. Today, we're the 6th largest producer of wind electricity. Same kind of strategy. So this is what our wonderfully diverse economy looked like. This is the middle of the bad days of the recession. This is our wind and solar guys who were keeping us out alive, just holding us on thanks to a really great governor by the name of Bill Ritter. Here's pharma, way out of sync. By the way, if you're going to invest, get in big pharma these days. It's getting really good. You can see fossils, investments, telecom, aerospace, IT software, medical devices, and then you get these 3 little blue balloons here that are really all part of one cluster: financial services, investment, insurance, and banking. Everybody was on that side. But we knew these guys were going to go. We had just added a new flight to Tokyo. We now had worldwide access around the world. So we called up the governor and said, we need to go to California because there are 2 people doing their best to make Colorado great. One of those was Governor Pat Quinn of Illinois, and the other one was Governor Jerry Brown of California. both of whom raised their income tax by 35% at that time. Now, that's not fun. Pat is literally a personal friend of mine. I wrote him a letter of astonishment when that happened. But the financial service people didn't have any place to shelter their dollars, so they came along. And this is what happened in 2013. You'll notice that the midline is now over here, and everybody is over there. The size of the balloon tells you how big the industry, and the vertical tells you how concentrated it is. We are the number 2 space economy in Colorado, metropolitan Denver, and the number 1 metropolitan area for concentration of private sector engineering firm. What we do is, in this cluster strategy, if you see energy, aviation, space, financial services, tech, and bio, we create associations under those, and we support all those associations. That keeps us in depth in our information that we have about these companies, and it also keeps our ear to the ground so that if they're thinking about leaving town, we know it immediately. This has turned out to be one of the smartest things we did. The Code of Behavior. This is the Metro Denver Code of Ethics. If you want to go, just Google it. A number of metropolitan areas use it today. The first goal is sell the region first and our community second. Second is don't speak ill of your neighbor. Does this sound like just basic etiquette? Not etiquette. Etiquette. You can't run around a deal. In other words, when there are 3 finalists and you're kicked off the list, you can't run around and try to undo the deal. We had a company called Sunstrand from Rockford was thinking about moving into Fort Collins, where I worked. Fort Collins and Loveland are right next to each other. We agreed to do it. This was back in the early 80s. We agreed that we would do the project together, and whoever Sunstrand wanted to build, it was fine. And Sunstrand decided that they were going to come to Fort Collins. A Loveland economic development person got on an airplane, flew here, sat on the front steps of Sunstrand demanding to see the president. The president did see him, and the company did not go to Fort Collins or to Loveland. It went to Grand Junction, Colorado. So we lost that because of our behavior. Can't advertise against your neighbor. You have to keep confidence. Now, this is amazing for economic development people, to know everything that's going on and not tell anybody. We decided that more information is better than less. We'll tell you everything that we know that we're not under a non-disclosure agreement about. If a local company is inquiring about moving to your community, you must notify the donor community. Mansville, which is one of the Fortune 500 companies in our metropolitan area, was going to move its headquarters out of downtown into the western county, Jefferson County, when I was CEO there. And I had to call the people in downtown Denver and tell them that a company that was really important was looking at moving to my county. It was a tough day. They retained the company. The company got a better deal on its lease and stayed in downtown. But again, that keeps you from being angry at one another. If a company in your community cannot get the resources it needs and is thinking of moving out of the region, you must notify the other partners and ask them if they can help. I can't tell you the thousands of jobs we've retained. A local economic development person can't find the right building, can't find the right deal, sends it to everybody else. Somebody's always got another building. And if a partner violates the code, sanctions can be implied, including a lifelong ban from the family. This would have to be an egregious thing, and we have come very close on 2 times. So results, we've had a few. In 1986, when we got down to the final 3 communities, in those days we were just a regional competitor, Phoenix, Dallas, and us, we got 30% of those deals. And if you look at the size of those 2 markets and Denver's size at that time, we were kind of getting our share. But after operating the Metro Denver EDC into 1992, we were at 62% of those. And then we had the other downside. Because wages went up, we became non-competitive. So we dropped from 62% closure to 52%. But it's fun to beat Dallas every day. Thousands of retained jobs. The economy that couldn't fall off the floor is now considered one of the best in the country. This was a headline in Forbes magazine in 1988. Denver economy, you can't fall off the floor. So if you want to think about a bad reputation, you've lost all your oil and gas folks, you got second most polluted city, and your economy is in ruins, and that's where we started. Our unemployment rate's near 4%. We're in the top 5 of choices desired by millennials to migrate. And we're the most fit in the second most active metropolitan area in the country. So this is an average client's decision. A typical company starts out with 35 options, and here's the rundown to the 3. And this is where we strive to get the Metro Denver area in. And then ultimately there's a final. And notice that 40% of engagements actually lead to deals. A lot of people look, but not all of them buy. So this is normally an hour and 40-minute presentation. And at the end of it, I'm sure I could have convinced you that we were truly the smartest people in North America, if not maybe the Western Hemisphere. But that's the truth. We just made it up as we went along. We saw opportunities. We kept the doors open for good ideas. We vetted those ideas. The people who had the ideas got credit. They weren't sucked up by somebody else. And what started out in 1986 and 87 by the Crazy Eight was to just try to get more deals in the door. We were just trying to change that one thing. We just wanted more opportunities in the door. We ended up changing everything. All those metropolitan districts that came up, that Metro Mayor's Caucus, the way we think today. The first response to a challenge in our community today is about what do we have to do together to get this done? It's not like, who do we penalize? Who do we put in the stocks and put them out on the street and let everybody spit on them? That's a lot of waste of time. Do we still have our fights? Yeah, but they aren't lifelong quarrels that go on. The feuds are few, except from folks from out of town or folks who are not connected to our code of ethics. And I don't even remember today exactly what it felt like to be back there. I just know that people think differently today. And we don't have to run to the public, and there's a big opportunity to do something. We don't have to spend an enormous amount of time trying to get them to understand the issue. Because there is a sense that everybody gets their say, not everybody gets their way. But the best thing that we say and the best thing that we end up doing usually turns out okay. And some of the things we really screwed up during that period of day have been resuscitated because of our attitude. There are things that we would have never, ever believed could have happened after screwing up so badly. For example, our transit system found out it had only missed its revenue projections on the big transit project, only missed their revenue projections by $3.5 billion. 100% miss. Okay? Boy, if you really wanted to stick somebody in the stocks and whip them until they bled to death, that was it. And the response was, well, here's what you have to do. You have to find every nickel you can find from the feds. You've got to get every nickel you can get from the local governments. And you've got to put together every public-private partnership you can lay your hands on. And after that's all done, you can come back and we will fund that campaign to increase the taxes. 16 metropolitan communities competed for a $1.04 billion grant from the Federal Transit Administration. There were 16, then there were 12, then there were 10, then there were 7, then there were 3, and then there was only 1. And it was Metropolitan Denver. We got it all. That takes a good bite out of $3 billion, by the way. And Secretary LaHood came to town to give us this wonderful check. He's like a good guest, you know. Brings you flowers. He brings us a check for $1.04 billion. But his comment was interesting. He said, I have been to 212 of the metropolitan regions in the United States. And I can say without any fear of objection from the other 211 that Metropolitan Denver is the most collaborative community in the country. And that's why I'm here today to give you $1.04 billion. If there was ever testimony that collaboration works, it paid off in real cash. And the next time you fly to Denver and get a chance in 2016 to take that train, remember that collaboration pays. Thank you.
What are your current regional goals?
I think the median housing price in Rockford today is what, about $55,000, $57,000 if I read that correctly. Median housing price in Metro Denver today is $413,000. Our regional goal is to get the price of housing down. We have a group of trial lawyers who are very successful in, as they say, finding their way to the Constitution, but a law that was passed in 2010 makes it impossible to build condominiums for us. And so when you think of affordable housing, market rate rental, condominiums for rent, and then buying condominiums, those two pieces don't exist in our market right now. In the last 6 years, we have been in the top 5 as places for millennials to migrate. But when rents and housing prices go so high, it doesn't take them long to turn. So it's important for us to continue to attract those millennials. They do smoke marijuana, by the way. They don't think it's a big deal. They also are very inventive, very creative, and they're very different than those that came before them. 27% of them have their own companies already. It is the world's entrepreneur. And if you can't attract those people, your Social Security and the vibrancy of your community is going to be impacted.
Next question is, what are the key elements of the 30 to 40-year leadership development plan?
We have a program called Leadership Denver. It's for the 30-somethings. These are the folks who are getting ready to slide into the 40-something leadership. And we ran that since 1972. Then somebody said, well, what if you're not quite good enough to get into Leadership Denver, which has about 50 people? So why don't we get a thing called Chamber 101 or something like that? And these are the people who didn't necessarily make it into Leadership Denver, and they're in their mid-20s to their 30s. So now I got 20 to 40. And then somebody said, well, all these colleges and universities have what's called the President's Class, which are these very elite kids, smartest kids in their class, and they get picked by colleges to be in these classes. All through Colorado, every university had a President's Leadership Class. We went and said, well, how about if we manage this all for you? Which is now called the Colorado Leadership Alliance, which is all the 18-year-olds. So now I got 18 to 40, okay? Now we have a program called Access Denver. Access Denver is for all the new directors, managers, CEOs that come into town. It's an immersion 3.5-day program which teaches them all the rules. Tell them how the economy works, what the rules are. You got to work hard, you got to give back, you got to be honest. And they build their own network in those 3.5 days. And that's husband and wife, not just the particular employee. So now I've got to about 55. And after that, we don't care.
Did the community get engaged, or was the turnaround or transformation orchestrated only by the economic leaders? And then combining the second part, you talked about suspicion between community leaders, but was there suspicion in the community groups in general? How was that both overcome?
So the first part, was it just led by the economic development people? The answer is no, because there were so many other regional things going on at the same time. They were all playing off each other. The Metro Mayor's Caucus, of a way in which the Metro Mayors could behave. That resulted in the County Commissioners Caucus, which was all the county commissioners in the region. All of them trying to find ways to be more efficient, less suspicious of one another. The economic development folks were only playing part of that, and that was traditional economic development like Mike and I do every day. But the arts and culture folks came up and said, well, why don't we create this arts and cultural district? The thing now is a genuine economic impact every year, about $300 million. That's a real industry that was built with a little 0.1% sales tax. So all those things all kind of happened at the same time, everybody learning from each other as they were moving along. In all honesty, there hasn't been a lot of it in the last several years because people kind of figure they got all the major regional challenges put in some place or another. In terms of the distrust side, that's really plays out every day and has to be earned every day. To give you an example, we're the honest broker on neutral ground. We're the servant leader. But in the 1980s, all the growth in metropolitan Denver was going southeast. a place called the Denver Tech Center. City of Denver, all the folks in the Northeast, Northwest, Southwest, thought I was pushing every project down to Southeast. Point was they had beautiful office buildings, they had traditional kind of 1970s, 80s business park strategy, and in 1998, it all changed. Up the Boulder corridor, along came the dot-com run-up. So all the tech guys ran towards Boulder. Now the guys on the south side are bitching at me, thinking I'm stealing all their companies and running them up to Boulder. And then comes 2004, and Governor Bill Ritter gets in the energy business, and all of a sudden all the wind and solar guys are going to the Northeast. Now the guys in Boulder thinking I'm screwing them, the guys down Southeast thinking I'm screwing them, and the guys in Northeast are going, Tom's not playing favorites. He's not playing favorites. And then, after years of trying to take a really dead downtown, suddenly blossomed in the mid-90s. A downtown that was considered to be the weakest sister in the metropolitan region suddenly becomes the coolest place on the planet. Now they all bitch at me. Everybody thinks I'm pumping everything into Denver. If you've got 7 railroad lines running into your town and a beautiful new Union Station, guess what? You can compete with anybody in the world. But what's done is that feedback of information to all the partners every day about what goes on. They know why they won and lost. And the North County is called Adams County. It's kind of the redheaded child at the family reunion, and always getting and always losing. Every day for 5 years after we started this, here's why you lost. You don't have the labor force. You haven't got the right buildings. Your incentives suck. And finally, one day, we had this big opportunity. It was a data center. And my partner up in Adams County walked into the commissioners. He said, you're going to have to buy this deal. They said, how much? He said, $462,000. They all kind of looked at each other and said, okay. That deal got done, and they just started to roll after that. But if we hadn't told them, if we didn't have that open door, that exchange of information every day, my partner up there would have never been able to go into the commissioners and make that case without enough data behind it to know that he deserved an honest shot. And he finally got it.
What is Metro Denver's role in workforce development?
The role of us in workforce development is primarily, if you saw all those clusters, it becomes very obvious to providers what kind of jobs are in those various industries. To give you an example, the University of Colorado in Denver looked at our clusters in 2005 and said, you've got a subcluster in insurance. And so, do you know anybody who ever grew up wanting to be in insurance? I mean, the only people I've ever met, I've talked to hundreds of people in the insurance business. If their dad or their mom was insurance, they end up in insurance. But nobody goes to school to, what are you going to be? I'm going to be in insurance when I graduate. I know one. Is it you? He majored in college. Oh, see, there you go. Exactly. She said he majored in college, and I'll tell you what happened. This dean looks at that, and she goes around, talks to the insurance companies. He said, we have no risk underwriters anywhere. We have to go to Atlanta. We got to go to the Northeast to get these folks. So she started this risk class. She graduates about 25 kids every year, 100% placement. So she came back to me a few years later, and she said, you know, there's no master's degree program for people who are in the oil and gas and in clean tech, who are the technical people, to get training to become folks who run companies. So I'm going to get a program, put it together, called GEM, Global Energy Management. And she started out with oil and gas guys first. Today she puts more people in that class in the city of Houston than the University of Houston puts in their program. So all these folks come here to get trained. And the last thing, the investment folks I was just telling you about, she is now doing exactly the same thing. She said it's the easiest thing in the world. You bring these kids in, you got guaranteed placement. Take this course, take these courses, you can go to work. So that whole idea of trying to go around and educating kids, which I've spent millions of dollars in my career, has never worked out as great as having someone going, you take these classes, you'll get a job, it starts at 65 grand. That's been the success.
A theme of a lot of what you discussed that happened to transition in Denver was about funds and money. Taxes are high in Rockford. How do we go about finding a new model other than continuing to think about raising taxes?
I had the same conversation with the Milwaukee Sentinel about a decade ago. And I spent a lot of time they were getting ready to create the Milwaukee 5, which is a very good regional economic development program. And I walked in and they said, so what do you think we could do to fix Milwaukee? And I said, I'd cut your taxes. You want to talk about, I almost didn't get to give my speech. What do you mean? And this is going to be heresy. I'm sorry. And it's bad tax policy, okay? But Colorado is very decentralized, and it relies very, very heavily on sales tax. And I know in the Midwest, because the economies aren't growing as fast in the Midwest, relying on sales tax is very, very difficult. But the Midwest relies mostly on property tax. Think of your monthly payment and think of your annual property tax and figure out what percent of your payment on your house goes to property tax. I'm guessing about 3%. That's a pretty common number through the Midwest. Metropolitan Denver, it's 0.7%. So if you've got $1 million house, you're looking at paying about $7,000. Sound familiar? Anybody here with $1 million house? Well, what that does is that suppresses, those higher property taxes suppress gain in value. And how do most Americans make their fortune? Home ownership, right? I'm stunned in Milwaukee, not here in Rockford, looking at the difference for a price sitting on the North Shore in Milwaukee versus the North Shore of Chicago. Because Illinois does have fairly low property taxes, but they're not low enough. I think you need to go back to sales tax. Yes, it fluctuates up and down, but the point is that you free up more money and you create much more discipline within government. That, to me, has been the challenge. Colorado's discipline did not come voluntarily. We passed a really crappy piece of legislation, but parts of it really have resonated. No tax increase without a vote of the people. That's miserable, but you got to make a hell of a case if you're going to go build a transit system. You got to work really hard at making people understand that. But you can't free up enough wealth in the marketplace if you're continuing to tax people miserably. And that was the challenge for us. And it's a challenge for anybody in the Midwest. Because when you shrink wealth, finding the money to create an economic development organization is difficult. But as they said, you can't raise money in paradise, and nobody ever thought when we started this we could raise $6 million. But we weren't living in paradise. We were living in hell, and we raised $6.5 million. And when these two folks came to town and they said, I need to raise $10 million, they said, we think we could do 14, and we raised $14 million in a town that was on its butt again after the dot bomb. So where there's a will, there can be a way, but people have to look and dig deeper than they can imagine. Thank you all.
Thank you very much for coming out again tonight. Watch for our next community conversation, hopefully announced soon. And stay positive and thank those that are doing good and putting the greater good of our region ahead of their own self-interest. Okay? Have a good night. See you in the lobby. Thank you.